I wanted to begin by asking you, did you go to the movies as a kid? And if you did, were there any films or actors or even directors who had a particular impact on you or were favorites at that time of your life?
No, I loved going to movies when I was a child. I remember. And the movies in those days were 10 cents. And you got 2 features and a cartoon and the news. So you were in the movie house from 2 o'clock until 5:30. You used to come out and the light, you know, you squint like this. And it was actually 10 cents. That's when I was tiny and in Toronto. So I did like movies. And my favorite movie when I was maybe 5, 6 years old was Gunga Din.
Yeah.
I'll never forget Gunga Din. The man that made you, but you and I used to quote Kipling, and I was very carried away with that. And the other was Marie.
Rosemary. Yeah.
Rosemary. I loved Rosemary because it was about Mounties, and I thought it was about Canada. I thought it was about my home country, and I fell in love with Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald, and I used to sing the songs. Rosemary, can you believe this? I mean, at 6 years old.
And what a lot of these I know I know where I'm leading you, but I want to just have, if you don't mind telling the story, but what first brought you to the United States, and what sort of in America did you encounter at that time? First time you were over here.
I think you know, I came to America in the 60s, early 60s, and I was at that time working for the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And I was in television. So I came to New York, and they gave me at CBS, they gave me the Hit Parade. It just moved over from NBC. So I was the one with Dorothy Collins, Snooky Lanson, and it was every Saturday night. And we were at the Ed Sullivan Theater, over here where David Letterman is.
Mm-hmm.
And we were on Saturday night, and that was my first job in the United States. And outside of that, I went to the States when I was just getting out of the Navy. I was only 18 years old, and I was being demobilized because I was only in for a year and a half. And I hitchhiked. Because you were in uniform, you could get a ride so easily. And so I hitchhiked all the way to New Orleans. And that's where I came across racial prejudice for the first time. And outside of Memphis, Tennessee, when I got on a bus, because we could ride buses for nothing, because we were in uniform.
Uh-huh.
And people always thought it was English because of the uniform, and then I had my Canada badges on. And so I went to the back of the bus because it was a hot day and the window was open. And the bus started and then it stopped. And the bus driver looked at me in the mirror and he said, "You trying to be funny, sailor?" I was embarrassed. You know, I was 18 years old. I was just embarrassed. I didn't know what to do. And I looked around me, and he says, "Can't you read the sign?" And I looked up, and here was a hand-painted sign, because the letters weren't quite distinct. And it was painted in white paint on a black piece of tin. It was hanging from a wire right in the middle of the bus. So I knew it wasn't an official sign. Maybe his sign, I don't know. And it said, "Colored people to the rear." And I looked around me, and there were a couple of black citizens sitting there, and then I looked up and I saw a group of white people at the front of the bus. So I didn't know what to do, and I got up, and I got off the bus. So that was my first protest, and he left me there standing in the hot sun and pulled away, left me in the dust. And I thought, it's not right. Too many black soldiers and sailors were giving their life in defense of the country, and they couldn't even ride on a bus in a seat that they wanted to sit down. And so I got very upset, and I never forgot that. So when I made In the Heat of the Night or Soldier Story or any of the films I made about America, this became a big thing for me personally. I think that's about the only way I can explain it. It wasn't a complicated thing. It was an attempt. I made a big attempt to understand the evolution of black citizens in America. So I spent a lot of time in high school studying the works of so many different people in the development of racial prejudice in America, and that's why I became a big fan of Martin Luther King. I marched in his funeral, and I became involved.
Now, why a lot of people might have had that experience and not had it have the impact on them that it obviously did for you. Why do you think, where does your social conscience come from that would have made you appreciate the significance of that experience?
Well, I think in Canada, I had been taught when I was growing up that tolerance was an important part of being a good citizen, that you had to be tolerant of other people's ideas. And I came from a country which had a liberal government and was, I think, I don't know, I think my upbringing had something to do with it. And I just have always had this kind of, I don't know, when I was young, I had a kind of a rebellious spirit about human rights and all of that, all of those things, those issues. I don't know, I was just a political animal, I think, when I was a kid.
Nothing wrong with that. And so you mentioned, just to jump backwards a second, you mentioned that you were working initially, your first job, I think, was CBC. How did that come about? When did you first have a sense of wanting to even be involved in television directing?
Well, I think it was, I was always wanted to be an entertainer. So I started out as an actor and a performer. And when I was 6 years old, I was doing the shooting of Dan McGrew and reciting endless stanzas of poetry. And I was very tiny. And I guess the adults in the audience thought this was amusing, that this kid would be, and out of the night, which was 50 below, and into the dim and glare, there stumbled a miner fresh from the creeks, dog dirty and loaded for bear. 2 guns. And I would get very dramatic in reciting Robert's service. And I was just such a tiny kid that they used to think that was cute, I guess. And I remember that. And I remember, performing, singing and dancing and stuff. And I was in little shows. And I guess that's the way I drifted into show business.
And you did some in
university,
some in
school,
right? Yeah.
Yes, and in university. I did a lot of University of Toronto. I was writing and producing and directing college musical shows.
So you get out of college and now have to figure out, and having been in the service,
Right.
and now you have to figure out what you're going to do with your life. How did it start to come together?
Well, I think I was as confused as anyone can be at that point in their life. I was only in my 20s, and I was a little nervous about show business and how do you get into it? How do you? So I had a meeting. I got a meeting with some guy at the CBC, at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And I told him of my dreams, that I wanted to get into television because it was just starting. And nobody's interested in radio anymore, you know. It's television's on the, it's a new medium of communication. And I believed it was the greatest medium of communication devised by man. I thought it was going to change the world, that we could see something that was happening 1,000 miles away at the instant it was happening in your own house. How is that possible? And you could hear the sound and you could see the picture. I mean, television to me was the end of be all and end all. And so I just desperately wanted to work in television. So they put me into a training program. I guess the guy was impressed with my passion. And I went to England because he told me that the British were on the air with the BBC. And they had no commercial broadcasting in England. So they weren't interested in selling soap, and they weren't interested in selling cars. They were using television as a medium of communication, and that they were the best. That television in America was just nothing but trying to make money. But if I went to England, I might have the opportunity of working with the BBC. So I went to England on a freighter, and I was just a kid. And how I thought I was going to get a job with the BBC, I had no training. I was just out of university. But I found a Canadian there called, Bernie Braden, and he had a show on the BBC called Bedtime with Braden, with his wife, and it was kind of they would do sketches, and it was kind of like an early form of the Jack Parr show or the late night shows, yep. Steve Allen show, something like that. So I got an interview with him and told him I was a young Canadian and I was a writer. And I could write funny stuff, and I could do all this. And he said, "What have you written?" And I didn't know what to tell him. I said, "Well, I did a lot of stuff at university. I mean, but I could show you some stuff I wrote." And then I started to sing him a song about Toronto. So my first, I was doing an audition for this guy. And I said, Toronto, what a wonderful spot. What a beautiful place to be. I know I wanna leave Toronto. Toronto is a place for me. You know, I don't mean Pittsburgh. And I just wrote these things. So he was impressed, I guess, and he gave me a job. And that was my first job. So I could say I was writing for the BBC. When I came back to Canada a year and a half later, I had a little bit of experience. As a matter of fact, I was the only one who had experience in live television because it was all live. There was no tape. So the moment you turn the camera on, you were on television. I mean, there was no recording devices in those days.
Before I ask you how you came to make the transition into film, one thing that I have to ask you is the thing that sort of separated or was unique about your generation of filmmakers as you came up was obviously the fact that a lot of you had this experience in live television. And I wonder, in what ways do you feel that was beneficial to you as a filmmaker learning the ropes? And did it also, just for the heck of it, did it also have any, was it a hindrance in any way? Were there different things that you needed to do differently that you didn't, so just, was it helpful and or hurtful?
I think coming from television, we learned how to compose shots. And what is more, when you sit in a control room and you're working with 3 or 4 cameras, you're your own editor. So you can see, take 3. Okay, you release 2, move over here 2. Great. And you're talking to the cameraman, the guys at the camera, while you're on the air on another camera. You're telling them where to move their camera, where to change the shot, whatever, over the shoulder, and so therefore you're actually the editor. So you're the editor, you're moving the camera, you're becoming a cinematographer practically. You've got a zoom lens so you can zoom out, you can zoom in, you can lift the camera, you can dolly the camera, and do all of these things. And you can talk to everybody at the same time as you're working, which means that it's really a complicated situation here. Because if you're shooting a drama, you're listening to the actors with one ear, and you're telling you're talking to somebody else at the same time. So it was all very complicated. And because there was no videotape, there was a tremendous pressure on everybody that you were on the air constantly. So there was always terrible things happening. I mean, actors would forget their lines, or someone would sing the wrong key, or somebody would play a clunker in the orchestra. I mean, a camera, you would lose a camera, all of a sudden it would just go off the air, and you, take one, I zoom in one. What happened to, where the hell are you? There was just panic all the time. It was nothing but panic. So I think in that way, directors from television were very cool. Nothing could flap us. And therefore, Sidney Lumet, John Frankenheimer, all of my contemporaries, we all came from New York. We all came from television into film, and we were very impatient because we're used to working fast. And in films, they took the camera, and then they lit forever, and we would just get bored. We'd say, come on, let's move it. I got work to do. I got a whole film to shoot. I can't spend all day here. And everybody would look at us and say, take your time, because remember, what you shoot is recorded forever. What are you talking about? I go on the air and it's recorded. It just goes out there to millions of people. What are you talking about? I know what's important here. And so I think television directors brought a great deal of pressure and impetus to filmmaking. I think we worked faster and we thought faster. We knew what we wanted because we had been our own editors, so we were kind of, bring the camera over here, and she would say, well, how do you know how to do that? What do you mean bring the camera over there? What's your next shot? I always knew what my next shot was. And they'd say, well, you can't do that. You can't just move the camera that quick. What are you talking about? Yes, I can. I know where I'm going. I can see the film in my head before it's shot. So I know what the cuts are. That's as close as I can explain.
No, it's terrific. And I guess just to connect the dots between what we were talking about before, just your experience in television and then now making the transition, how did that transition actually come about? Did you aspire to be a film director, or
No, I never never saw myself as a film director. I always saw myself doing television specials. So I was doing the Judy Garland special, and I'd done the Belafonte special, the first black special in America. I had done Danny Kaye special, his first time on television, and I was doing Judy Garland's first time on television. So I got two guests, got Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin.
How did you pull that off?
I don't know. I just told them that it would mean a great deal to Judy if you could do this show. I know money doesn't mean anything to you, but which wasn't true. He was getting 50 grand or something, for doing 3 songs. I mean, the money was there. It was just, how do you get him?
Right.
And everybody was afraid of Frank Sinatra. Everybody's afraid to talk to him. And I couldn't figure that out. Why are you afraid to talk to him? He's a singer. He's another singer. Yeah, but he's famous and he's thinking of the mafia. And I said, well, I didn't know anything about that, I guess. I was still thinking as a Canadian down here doing television specials. So I would pick up the phone. Hello, is this Frank? Who is this? Well, it's Norman Jewison. You wouldn't know me. I'm the director of the Judy Garland show. So he knew who Judy Garland was.
Right.
And I said, she's decided to go on television for the first time, Frank. And I really think it would mean a great deal to her if you would be part of that experience. And it's not going to take too much of your time. Maybe you do a number with Judy, and maybe do a number by yourself. And maybe, is there any way that we can make this happen? And I really think it will be a remarkable moment on American television. And he said, who is this talking? And so I literally booked Frank Sinatra on the Judy Garland special. And the last thing I said to him was, Frank, one more thing. We'll be working in Los Angeles at the studio, and we're going to all get together. I'll have Judy, I'll have Kay Thompson, I'll have the writers, I'll have the orchestra conductor. We'll all be there on a certain date. So, yeah, okay, kid. All right, yeah, kid, okay. And I said, and one other thing. Can you bring Dean?
What did he say?
And he laughed. I can remember him laughing. And he said, sure, kid, I'll bring Dean. And he brought Dean Martin. And that's the way it happened.
Amazing.
And Judy was over the moon. She just thought this was great.
And isn't it right that it was during the making of one of those installments? Because I know
Yes.
that's where...
Oh, yeah. Later on, we did a whole series of Judy Garland. But at that time, there was just this one big special. And that was the famous special with Judy and the lights and the ramp and Frank and Dean.
But was Tony Curtis a guest on one of them, or how did that...
Tony Curtis came to a rehearsal because the word went out in L.A. that these three great stars were together. And so the word went out, so everybody came down to see the dress rehearsal, just to hear them singing. And of course, Judy hadn't been around for a while. She'd been in Europe. And I'll never forget, Tony Curtis said to me, he watched me. I was running around, and I was up in the booth, and then I was down the floor, and I was trying to keep everybody excited, tumbling, and trying to keep the thing going, because we only had one day rehearsal, and then we were going to shoot all that stuff. Because in television, we never had a lot of time. And he said, hey, kid, come here. I want to meet you. My name's Tony Curtis. I said, gee, I know who you are, Mr. Curtis. I know who you are. He said, sit down. I said, well, don't have much time. And he said, did you ever think of doing a movie? And I said, oh, God, no, I never thought of doing a movie. He said, well, I'm working with a television director from New York now called Bob Mulligan. I said, I know Bob. And he said, well, he's a very good director. And he says, I'm looking for a young, smart, young director. And he said, I'm doing a remake of Little Miss Marker. It's called 40 Pounds of Trouble. So why don't I send you the script? Maybe you'll see something you want to do. So I said, gee, that would be great, Mr. Curtis.
And that was it?
That's how I got 40 Pounds of Trouble. It was Tony Curtis who gave me a break.
And was that at Universal, or Universal, the contract came after that? Was the contract for it?
The contract came after that.
Okay.
Tony was under contract to Universal. So the film was with Universal.
Right.
So then I went over to Universal and I met the people. And of course, they were very leery about me and said, gee, what's he done?
Yeah.
Tony says, he's done all kinds of stuff. For God's sake. Didn't you see the Judy Garland show? Didn't you see Tonight with Belafonte? And of course they had, but they were film people.
Right.
So they were very suspicious of me, remember.
And so I would imagine, I guess on the basis of that first film with Tony Curtis, they saw you could do it, and that's what made them say, let's do did they come to you and say, we want you for a 7-film contract? And at that time probably sounded very good, right?
Yeah. I think the next thing they did was they came to me with the Doris Day film. Because Doris Day was a big star at Universal. And I remember I wasn't too interested in it at the beginning. And then my agent said, look, Norman, they're giving you this great opportunity. You're only doing one picture. And these people are willing to sign you for, I don't know, 7 pictures or something. So I realized it was a big opportunity for me. And so I should just, I should play ball with everybody and do what my advisors told me to do. So my lawyer and my agent at William Morris and people all told me that. I said, oh yeah, sign the contract. I said, well, you get 10% of everything I make. So I started to figure out what was motivating people.
And for you, as I understand it, and please stop me if I'm wrong, but what I gathered from reading to prepare for this was that the problem is, no matter what you do at first, the first thing you do well, they want to have you do forever. And
That's right. They want to pigeonhole you.
Right.
So they said, look, he does comedy. He's very funny. He can get a good performance out of it. He knows comedy. So let's always keep him doing comedies. And so they pigeonholed you. And I didn't want to just make comedies. And I want to make everything. I have a great love of music, and I had a lot of experience in musicals, music, specials. So I felt from the very beginning, I was very suspicious. I've always been very suspicious of the people who own the company store. I'm always interested in people's motivations. When the moment someone wants to make a deal with you,
what's in it for
why
them?
do you want to
Right.
make the deal with me? Why are you offering me something? What is the motivation behind what you're thinking? And so I was very suspicious of the studio.
But you kind of outfoxed them, from what I gathered, because the way out of it, I know, like the 3 or 4 comedies that you did for them were all pretty profitable, from what I gather. They were well liked, but you wanted out, and the way that you did it, I thought, was so kind of cute.
Well, I found that I had to renew they had to renew their option
Each
with
year.
me every year, and they had to do that by sending a registered letter. which said, we're renewing your option. And they'd have to sign it, and that was the way it was done in those days. There were no there was no email, and so I didn't receive the registered letter on the day it was supposed to be received. So I went to my agent. I said, we didn't get the letter, and they said, well, that doesn't matter. I mean, it's going to come in this week. They're going to renew your option. I said, but they didn't send the letter. And as long as they didn't send the letter, I don't know, maybe they're not going to renew the option. So what do we do? And they said, you want to get out of your contract? I said, yes. So they said, don't go near the studio.
Yeah.
Don't go over for lunch. Don't go to your office. Don't go to the parking lot. Don't let anyone see you. Just disappear. And maybe it's a clerical mistake.
Right.
That they just forgot to send the letter or register it. And that's the way I got out of the contract. They weren't too happy.
But you pretty quickly got yourself landed on your feet, my sense is that the first, I don't know if this was the first thing after being free, but the first major thing I think was Cincinnati Kid, and
That's right.
Peckinpah had been fired.
Yeah, Sam Peckinpah had started this film with Steve McQueen and Edward G. Robinson, and about 2 weeks into the film, Ransohoff, the producer of the film, Marty Ransohoff, fired him because he was shooting stuff that he felt wasn't in the script and shouldn't be on the screen. Now, this bothered me a little bit because I was a fan of Marty Ransohoff. I was a fan of the director.
Right.
And so I called Sam Peckinpah, and I said, I would never replace you or replace another director. And he says, I don't care, but Marty Ransoff's a jerk, and I can't get along with him. And I said, but why? Just answer me one question. Why are you shooting this film in black and white, Marty? I said, because cards.
Or Sam, you said.
Sam.
Yeah.
I said, cards are red and black. I mean, clubs and spades are black, and diamonds and hearts are red. So the audience won't be able to see immediately what the cards are if you shoot it in black and white, because everything's going to be gray. So, it's. And there was a long pause, and he says, it's period, kid. It's period. And I said, well, you mean because it takes place in the 20s or 30s in New Orleans, that in those days,
The world was...
everything was black and white? He says, no, but people know when they see black and white, it's a period film. I said, Sam, that doesn't make sense. I've been seeing color since I was 6 days old. The world is in color.
Right.
So that's
fine.
I remember that conversation between me and Sam Peckinpah, and I took over the film, and then I closed it down. I closed down rehearsals and everything, and I said, I've got to rewrite it. And then I remember Marty Ransohoff said, what do you mean you got to rewrite? I said, well, the film, I think the script is very turgid and heavy. It was by Ring Lardner Jr., a very established screenwriter. But I felt it was a little on the heavy side, and it wasn't light enough, and didn't have enough contrast in it. So we closed it down, and I brought in another writer. Brought in, what's his name?
Southern. Or is that...
Terry Southern.
Yeah.
I brought in Terry Southern, who was really an edgy kind of tricky writer. Smoked a lot of pot. You know, I mean, we were younger, I guess.
Right.
And anyway, I brought in Terry Southern, and we literally rewrote the script.
Just
And I made Cincinnati Kid, so that was my first dramatic film.
well, and I have to ask you to, as your first dramatic leading man, you picked you got a character there, and I know that you've said in another interview that Steve McQueen really taught you the difference between an actor and a movie star. And for people who may not understand what you mean by that, can you explain a little bit? Because I thought it was very interesting, the discrepancy between.
Well, I think movie stars are different. First of all, they've got big heads. If you'll notice, most movie stars have big heads, and they look good in a close-up. I think they have an aura about them that when the camera rolls, somehow their presence becomes very apparent, no matter what character they're playing. And I think Steve McQueen, I don't think he knew much about acting as a craft, as an art. But I do think he was believable. And he knew how to stay cool. He was the coolest guy. He was so cool, I never knew what he was talking about half the time. You know, he said, "You're twisting my melon, man." Every time I talked to him, and I said, "Look, I know you want a father, and you like working with older directors. I'm not old enough to be your father. Why don't we say I'm your your brother, and I'm the brother who went to college. Now, I know you know how to take a car apart or a motorbike apart and put it together again on your front lawn. I don't know anything about that, but I'm going to look out for you." And so I convinced him that I would look out for him.
And that did.
And I cared about him. And he trusted me. And so we became, I worked with Steve a couple of times, and I became pretty close to him. He was very strange. I think he was a warlock, because I think he when the moon changed, he changed.
Yeah.
He would get on his bike and go out into the desert. I mean, he would literally disappear. And he'd go out there and smoke peyote and whatever with the native Indians, because he was a real loner. And he was a kind of a tortured soul. He had a terrible upbringing, and he lost his father when he was very young. And anyway, I liked Steve McQueen, and I thought he was I thought he was a real film star as compared to an actor.
Absolutely.
Who would go out on the stage alone.
Right.
I don't think he could walk on a stage alone and act. Richard Burton can do that, but he can't do that. But he could go out on the stage and be real. And maybe the Richard Burtons or Laurence Olivier's have to act to be real.
Right.
In other words, they're acting all the time, and Steve McQueen isn't. He's just Steve McQueen. And maybe that's what I was looking for.
The other big relationship that I believe came out of that film and lasted for a long time was with your editor, Hal Ashby, right? You started there.
Well, Hal and I were very, very close.
What made him?
I worked with Hal. He was doing a film called The Loved One with Tony Richardson, and
he was the editor, or he was
he was the assistant editor. The editor was Bob
Swank.
Bob Plank. Yeah. He was kind of the assistant to him, and so he was really training. But he had a lot of passion, and he was funny, and he was charming, and I liked Hal. And he'd say, "Come on in, come on into the editing room. I want to show you what Bob Schwenk and I did with this scene with Jonathan Winters. You're going to love this. It's so funny, man. And I would sit there and sit behind the moviola, and he would work the moviola, and he would show me. And Bob Schwenk was one of the great editors for William Wyler. And so Hal, because he was the assistant, the first assistant, he got to know the style of Bob Schwenk, and he got to know a little bit about the style of William Wyler, who was a god to me. So I was very impressed that he would even be in the same room with William Wyler. And so that's the way it started, and I said, have you ever thought of going out on your own and editing your own film? He said, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. I said, well, I'm doing a picture called The Cincinnati Kid. It's very complicated. It's going to be a very complicated editing job. It's all about cards. It's about a card game. How do you make a card game cinematic? How are we going to make it move and exciting? And he said, it's going to be difficult. There's no horses. You don't have any action. I said, I know. I need a good editor. I said, you want to edit it? So
and that was that?
That's the way it started. And Hal was with me for many films. And then I had the opportunity to help him direct his first film when he did The Landlord.
Yes, it's great. The last set of relationships that I think are interesting of that period, the Mirisch brothers. I had a chance to interview Walter about a year or two ago when he was getting a Turner Classic Movies tribute, and he spoke so often and so highly of you, and I realized looking at your filmographies that there were 4 films at least that 4 very important films that you guys teamed up on. Russians Are Coming, In the Heat of the Night, Thomas Crown Affair, and Fiddler on the Roof, and there may have been more, but those are the ones that jumped out to me as.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, how did you first come to cross paths with them? And people say that working with them was nicer than sometimes working with other producers because they would allow you to, they would stay out of the creative process. Is that right?
Well, that's what I really appreciated. All of the directors that worked at the Mirisch Corporation or made films through the Mirisch Corporation were middlemen. They were producers, popcorn salesmen. They were in the middle.
Yeah.
But all of their films were released through United Artists. So they weren't interested in distribution. They were more interested in the subject matter itself and the director. They were director-orientated company. So that's why they work with Billy Wilder, William Wyler, John Sturgis, and myself. So I found it was the first time in Hollywood that everyone, when I did a film for the Mirisch Company, they left me alone. They didn't tell me what to do. They helped me. When I wanted to meet an actor or when I wanted to discuss the stars I would be after, they would help me. They would say, well, that's a good idea. Yeah. Well, let me find out who represents them and how we can get the script to them and maybe make this happen. They were always helping the director. So I that's as much as I can say because they never really did much else,
Right.
but they did support me, and I needed support.
No, well, it obviously, whatever you guys were doing together, it worked because that unbelievable run over like 5 years to put out so many, classic movies. But I just want to very quickly, and I think we can fit this in hopefully, but I want to just touch upon those for a second because I wish we could do more extensively. But with the first one, The Russians Are Coming, is it true that you wanted to? It was your idea to take the Off Islanders and do something, and then and then working with William Rose. I know there was a very deliberate way you wanted to go about it, not mention certain things, and I just hope you could talk about the idea behind doing it.
Well, I think I wanted to make a film about Dayton before that was even discussed. I wanted to make a film about the relationship between Russia and America, because I felt that that the public was kind of influenced too much by anti-communism, by anti-Russian, that there wasn't, nobody was listening to each other. Everybody was talking about Cold War. Everybody was talking about atomic annihilation, that the Russians were going to drop an atomic bomb on us and annihilate us, or we were going to drop an atomic bomb on Russia and annihilate. And there was this fear. Everybody was living in a state of fear. And I wanted to make a film about common sense, that people are people the world over. Doesn't matter what political party they belong to. They're people. They have hopes and dreams and needs and sorrows and joy and pain, like everybody else. And so why can't we just get along? So let's just cool it down a little bit. And so Russians Are Coming was a film about the paranoia that existed at that time. And William Rose was an expatriate American writer who lived on the island of Jersey in the middle of the English Channel, and he was a little eccentric. And I thought he was a brilliant writer. He wrote Passport to Pimlico. He wrote a lot of wonderful Ealing studio comedies. And so I went to England and went to the Isle of Jersey and went to William Rose's house, and we sat and we actually came up with the idea of a Russian submarine running aground off Cape Cod somewhere, and everybody panics. Everybody in the island panics because they think it's an invasion. And so that's the way Russians Are Coming started out. Well, there was a lot of people who didn't want the film made. I guess because they thought it was, I was trying to make the Russians look good. I wasn't trying to make the Russians look good. I was trying to make them look real. Everybody was, there was no political, there was no, it wasn't a political film, and yet it was.
And your first audiences.
And my first audience, I'll never forget, I went to Arthur Krim, the head of United Artists, to tell him about this film. And when I finished telling him about all the reasons why I wanted to make it, he said, well, you know, there's a lot of people who won't want this film made. I said, why is that? He said, well, people that are to the right, I don't think they're going to want to see this film made. I said, right, left. I'm just, what am I? I'm nothing. I'm just a Canadian director. I don't, well, no, but I mean, you're dealing with something very political here. I said, I know that. He says, no, I want you to be careful. And I want you not to take sides here. Don't make it too political. So I made the film with his blessing. And for the first screening, he got the Vice President of the United States and a whole group in Washington. And we showed this film called The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. And I looked around and I saw all these senators and all these people, important people, and I thought, oh my God, this is taking such a chance. And of course, the Russian ambassador heard that we were showing the film, and he asked to be invited. So I said, well, yeah. I mean, you can't tell the Russians they can't come to see the film. The film is about Russians and Americans. And so that's the way it happened, and the Russian ambassador came. And of course, then I was invited to Moscow because everyone thought I was a communist. They thought I was pro-Russian, simply because they liked the character of Alan Arkin. It was ridiculous, but you know, that's the way films are. They have an effect upon the audience, and no one knows.
Well, and that's what perfectly transitions to number 2 of the 4 that you did there, which is obviously In the Heat of the Night. Just how did you, the material, first of all, how did you come upon it? But more than that, at what point in the process, I think this is the question everybody's got to wonder when they watch it today, at what point in the process did you realize that this was going to be a kind of movie that would have an impact longer or greater than almost, you know, it's hard to think of many movies that have had a greater social impact than that seemed to, or jarring effect?
Well, I don't think anyone knows, first of all, when they read a screenplay or they read a story, how important the movie's going to be. Nobody knows. I did not know that when Sidney Poitier slapped the white guy back, and he was playing a police officer, and he got slapped. So his instinct was to slap him back. Just an instinct. You can't slap me. I'm a police officer from Philadelphia in a $250 suit. I mean, I'm not a... So the motivation was honest, but it was a slap that was heard around the world because no black character had slapped a white character back in an American film. So I think that's one of the things that happened. And I think, as Bobby Kennedy said to me once personally, timing is everything, Norman. Timing is everything in politics and in art and in life itself. And the timing of this picture can be very important. This can be a very important film, Norman. He was the first person to tell me that. And that was before he saw it. I just told him about the story. So, I don't think anyone knows, and I do think that Bobby Kennedy was right. I think the timing of In the Heat of the Night, when it was released, America was going through a civil rights revolution. And I think this film kind of brought some common sense and some understanding of black-white relationships, because Rod Steiger and Sidney Poitier were so perfectly cast, and the characters they played were so clear in their inculcation, because they were inculcated with prejudice against each other for no reason other than color. And I think that comes through in the film.
And at the Poitier tribute a couple weeks ago, you pointed out just what even off screen, the contrast with these guys where, you know, Poitier is sort of the minimalist and Steiger's the scene stealer, and
right.
And I know that I think you mentioned that when you say cut, Poitier turns it off and Steiger stays going.
Yeah.
What is that?
Steiger was an actor. I mean, he was a performer.
Yeah.
And he could when he got angry, you knew it. And Sidney was a little concerned about him because he was worried that he would go over the top and so on. But I think he got to understand that Steiger knew exactly where he was going, and that I would always bring him down. And, you know, because we'd do another take, and I would say, Rod, can we just take it down a little bit here? So, the way we worked.
you've mentioned that you've referred to your sort of your race trilogy in a way, which was In the Heat of the Night, Soldier Story, and then The Hurricane. And I just that wasn't. I think I didn't get the sense that that was something you set out to make as a trilogy.
No,
but
no.
it's amazing how all three.
I didn't set out to make a trilogy.
No.
I make each film as it comes along, and that's the way it is. And I fall in love with each one of them. And I tell this. I try to do it simply. I tell it directly. I tell the story as simply as I possibly can. I think life is very complicated, and I think the simpler we can make things, the better. I can't even work my cell phone. It's so complicated. It's got so many potentials.
That's an iPhone. There you go.
It's a droid.
Oh, a droid. Okay.
They call it a droid. I tell you, it is the worst phone in the world. There's no off and on switch. I'm calling people I don't even want to talk to because I accidentally just touched it, and all of a sudden I'm talking to somebody that doesn't want to talk to me either. So it's. I think our lives have become very complicated.
Well, just to read you back one thing you said that with regard to with Moonstruck, I thought it was amazing where you said, to me it was just another romantic comedy, but when John Patrick Shanley won the Academy Award and then Cher won, I realized it wasn't just another romantic comedy. It was a romantic comedy that touched people in some mysterious way. And I guess, like you're saying, it's hard to... going into that one, for instance, you didn't...
Yes, I think, well, Moonstruck is about the force of the moon on people's behavior. And I did a little research, and I live on a farm. And I make maple syrup, and I raise cattle. And I realize that all the animals on the farm, every single animal, is affected by the moon. All we are is animals, human animals. We're still an animal. So we have animal reflexes. And we're all affected by the moon. And people have been writing about this since the days of Aeschylus. I mean, the Greeks wrote about the moon. Shakespeare wrote about the moon. Poets have been writing about the moon. Authors, books. Everybody's the magical power of the moon. And it's pulling the earth and what gravity does to us. And so I started to fantasize about the moon. So Moonstruck is a film about the romantic aspects of the moon. It's about family. It's about the relationship between a wife and a husband, a father and a daughter, two brothers. It's all about family. And everybody can relate to that because everybody has a family, or most people have a family. So I think in that way, I think Moonstruck becomes very personal to people. So that when came into the hotel the other day, and somebody said, mentioned my name, and he said, I have a reservation for Norman Jewison, and the guy says, Jewison, did you do Moonstruck? Did you do In the Heat of the Night? They call me Mr. Tibbs, he said. And then somebody else says, snap out of it. So I realized that people remember lines and moments out of my films. And this is very personal to me. I love it because I think it's like they read a book and they remember the line.
Absolutely.
And so in that way, it's very exciting. But you never know. You never know where a film's going to go.
To tie it in with this tribute that's happening now, the retrospective, I think that it's crazy that it's taken this long for something like this to happen in New York. And I was thinking, why is this? And I think that part of the issue may be that people love this auteur theory notion that you can find in somebody's work a common thread of style and sensibility and all of that. and so it makes it easy to pin them down and categorize them. With you, though, whether you're doing Fiddler on the Roof and Jesus Christ Superstar, or something completely different, Rollerball, or there's no thread really that I can establish, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And so what I'm just curious about is what it means to you for people to stop sort of this academic exercise for a minute and just actually step back and appreciate the full body of work as they should have for a long time, and I know they will in the long run. But I think we have this mentality about the auteur, this, it's.
I think you're right. I think we sometimes intellectualize the hell out of a film, so we really kind of miss what the film is about. I think films are about ideas, and I think each one has a. You have to find the core, the center idea of what you're doing. Why are you doing this film? Why are you directing it? Why are you writing it? Why do you want to act in it? I mean, it's because it has a raison d'etre. And I think if it doesn't, if your film doesn't have anything to say about the human experience, then don't make it. Just don't make it. Films should be about us, about people. I take them very seriously. And I've tried to make each film its own style. Each film has its own style. I mean, you want to talk about my personal style? Thomas Crown Affair is style over content, actually, when you look at the film. It's not the content of the film as much as the style in which the story is told. And that's what's keeping you interested. It's the way the story is told. So there's times I work harder trying to give a style to this particular story. But each one is different.